Murder in the Christmas priest's confession blood. A Sherlock Holmes mystery. Dear listeners, welcome to another Sherlock Holmes story. I'm Christopher, your guide through tonight's tale of secrets and suspense. Before we unravel the clues, I'm curious about you. What's your craft or calling? Are you a baker, a bookseller, a detective in your own right, or something entirely unexpected? Share it in the comments. I love learning about our clever and curious community. Now settle in, and let's step into tonight's story. Chapter 1. The fog that gripped London on that Christmas Eve seemed thicker than usual, swallowing the cobblestone streets and muffling even the most familiar sounds. The gas lamps cast halos of weak yellow light, their glow faintly struggling against the oppressive grey. The city felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something unspoken, something unnatural. I stood outside 221B Baker Street, staring at the door, my fingers lingering on the brass knocker. It was a peculiar night, one that felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Perhaps it was the biting cold, or the sense that something was on the verge of slipping through our grasp, something we had no right to understand. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, shaking off the chill as I made my way up to the study. There, as ever, sat Sherlock Holmes, hunched over the low desk, his sharp gaze fixed on a piece of paper, one of his many cryptic letters. "Holmes," I began, my voice tentative. "I'm afraid I cannot shake the feeling that something is amiss tonight." Without lifting his eyes from the page, Holmes responded, his voice smooth, though tinged with an unmistakable edge of excitement. "You are correct, Watson. Something is amiss. And it is just the sort of thing that should rattle even your skepticism." I frowned, stepping closer to his desk. "What do you mean? Has something happened?" His long fingers flipped the paper, revealing a letter, torn at the edges as though someone had been desperate to hide it. "This, Watson, is a letter from the Reverend Hugh McAllister, a priest in the East End. His message is cryptic, almost maddening, and yet there is something about it that demands attention." Holmes slid the letter across the desk, the words barely visible, smeared with faint dark smudges. I leaned in, reading the carefully scrawled message. "Father McAllister's confession, 5 a.m. tomorrow. The priest did not die, but he is gone. My name is erased. The truth cannot be spoken." A shiver ran down my spine, the letter's weight of despair settling on me. Holmes looked up at me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a new mystery. "You see, Watson, the Reverend McAllister claims he has been erased from history itself, not simply dead, but vanished, forgotten by all who should remember him." I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. "Erased from history? But how is that even possible? Surely you don't believe such nonsense? Consider the facts," Holmes continued, not waiting for my response. "McAllister is not merely the victim of a crime, Watson. He is a man whose very existence is being systematically removed from records. His name is absent from official documents. His parishioners have no memory of him, and there are no official accounts of his death." I leaned back, trying to wrap my mind around the concept. But if no one remembers him, how did we even receive this letter? How are we involved in this at all? Holmes's smile was thin, tinged with something darker. "That, my dear Watson, is the question. This letter was sent to us deliberately, which suggests someone knows we are in a position to investigate. But why us? Why now?" He rose from his chair, pacing across the room with his long, fluid steps. "McAllister's story is the key, Watson. And I suspect we're not merely dealing with a missing priest. We are dealing with a conspiracy. one that manipulates reality itself, twisting the very fabric of truth and memory. I could feel a growing sense of unease gnawing at me. A conspiracy that manipulates reality, I repeated, the words tasting strange on my tongue. Holmes, are we to believe that such things are even possible? Why not? Holmes said, his voice soft but firm, like a man stating an undeniable fact. The mind, after all, is far more pliable than you imagine. And history, Watson, history is but a collection of agreed-upon truths. He turned his gaze to the window, his eyes narrowing as if he could already see the answers stretching out in the fog outside. This, Watson, is no mere case of murder. We are dealing with something far more sinister. I stood still, lost in thought, as the weight of his words settled in. Was it possible? Could someone truly erase a man from existence? And why? Who could wield such power, and what could they hope to gain? Holmes continued to pace, his thoughts clearly racing ahead of mine. We must go immediately to the East End, Watson. The confession must be heard. The Reverend McAllister's disappearance is but a shadow of a much larger game. A game we can only hope to understand before it consumes us. I nodded, though a cold unease gripped me. As we prepared to leave, the fog outside seemed to deepen, the streets eerily silent. Something was wrong, deeply, incomprehensibly wrong, and the case we were about to enter would reveal a mystery unlike any we had ever encountered. Chapter 2. The cold carriage ride through the foggy streets of London felt longer than it should have. I sat opposite Holmes, his profile half hidden in the dim light of the lantern, his sharp eyes focused, seemingly lost in thought. The rattle of the wheels over the cobblestone streets did little to break the thick silence between us. I could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down on me, a sensation I couldn't shake. The Reverend McAllister has become the first link in a chain I fear is much longer, Watson, Holmes muttered, as if reading my thoughts. An invisible chain, one woven so carefully that even the victims do not realize they're bound by it. I nodded absently, still trying to grasp the enormity of what he was suggesting. The idea that a man could be erased from existence, the very thought unsettled me. How does one confront an enemy that exists in no records, no memories, no history? But if Holmes's mind was already moving toward an answer, I had no choice but to follow. The carriage slowed, drawing me from my reverie, and soon it came to a halt in front of a church. An imposing structure, its silhouette barely visible through the creeping fog. The scent of wet stone and decay hung in the air. The church was not unfamiliar to me, yet the faint unease I felt when I saw it was something new. This is where McAllister's parish once stood, Holmes said, his voice steady. Yet, Watson, if you look closely, you'll notice something odd. I followed his gaze to the entrance of the church. My heart skipped a beat. There, standing in front of the doors, was a man, or rather, what I assumed was a man. His face was blurred, as though seen through a veil of smoke. His features seemed to shift with every blink, never fully solidifying. I turned to Holmes, bewildered. Is this some kind of trick, the fog distorting my vision? No trick, Watson, Holmes said with quiet certainty. This is exactly as it should be. He stepped from the carriage with a grace that belied the tension in the air, and I followed closely behind, unsure of what we would find. The man in front of the church turned as we approached, his blurred features still undisturbed by our presence. He stepped forward, his movement unnatural, mechanical, almost as though he had been waiting for us. You are looking for Reverend McAllister, the man spoke, his voice hollow, carrying an echo that seemed to reverberate through the fog, But he is no longer here. No one is here." I froze for a moment, sensing the strange weight of his words. "What do you mean? The Reverend has simply disappeared?" The figure's gaze settled on me, and for a brief instant his face solidified. I saw the fleeting glimpse of a man, older, wearing a cassock, before the fog blurred him once more. The Reverend's name has been erased from every record. He was never here. No priest ever stood in this church. I glanced at Holmes, but he said nothing, merely staring intently at the man. The air between us thickened with a sense of dread, a sensation I could not explain but felt deeply. Holmes stepped forward, his voice firm. "Who are you?" The figure's eyes darkened. "I'm only a messenger. The ones who work in shadows, we take what is not ours, and we change what is already done." With that, the figure turned and melted into the fog, vanishing as suddenly as he had appeared. "Holmes, what in the world was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "That was a warning, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes never leaving the spot where the figure had stood. "A warning that we are being watched, and that the forces behind this are not bound by conventional rules." I felt a chill wash over me as I turned back to the church. But why? Why would anyone want to erase a man from history? And why McAllister? Holmes's expression remained unreadable. For the same reason, a shadow moves unseen. To manipulate the course of history, Watson, one must first control what is remembered. In this case, McAllister is not just any priest. He is a key to something far larger than we can yet comprehend. I looked at Holmes, confusion clouding my thoughts. "But how do we find this key, if it has already been hidden?" "That," Holmes said, his voice taking on a sharp edge of excitement, "is precisely why we must return to where it all began. The Reverend McAllister's confession. The time is almost upon us." We turned and walked back toward the carriage, the air growing heavier with each passing step. As we made our way toward the East End once more, I could feel something within me beginning to shift. Was it fear? No, it was something else, something far more unsettling. The fear that we were not just solving a mystery. We were unearthing a truth that might be better left buried. Chapter 3. The East End had its own soul, dark and gritty, a place where the fog seemed to settle heavier than anywhere else in London. The carriage weaved through narrow streets, its wheels creaking under the weight of the unsolved mystery pressing upon us. I could feel the tension mounting, as though the very streets whispered of a secret long buried, one we were getting dangerously close to unearthing. Holmes sat across from me, his mind undoubtedly working at a pace that left me far behind. The fog pressed in on all sides, thick and suffocating, and the lamplights barely held the darkness at bay. For the first time since our arrival in the East End, I could feel the weight of the unknown bearing down on us. "What are we walking into, Holmes?" I asked, my voice breaking through the oppressive silence of the carriage. Holmes did not immediately answer. His eyes were fixed on the window, and for a moment I wondered if he even heard me. But then, in his usual manner, he responded, as if to himself more than to me. "We are walking into a place where history itself has been distorted, Watson. Where the truth is no longer a fixed point, but something that can be altered, hidden, erased." I shuddered despite myself. "But how? How does one erase history? And why a priest?" Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Why anyone? Why not? McAllister was no mere priest, Watson. He knew something dangerous enough that the architects of this distortion sought to erase him completely. His confession may be our only link to the truth." We arrived at the dilapidated church, its once grand facade now an eyesore against the bleakness of the foggy night. It was a place forgotten by time, its doors warped, its windows broken, and its bell tower sagging with neglect. But there was an eerie stillness about it, as though it had been abandoned not by choice, but by design. Holmes stepped out first, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. He moved with purpose, his every step calculating and sure. I followed, albeit with a sense of unease that had grown since the carriage ride. "This is where McAllister was supposed to meet with someone," Holmes muttered as he approached the creaking doors. "But we are not here for the meeting itself. We are here for the traces left behind." The moment we stepped inside, the air grew colder. The musty scent of mildew and decay lingered, but there was something else, something unnameable. I felt it, a chill that sank deeper than the cold air. The space before us was vast, the walls lined with cracked stone and faded remnants of stained glass. But it wasn't the architecture that held my attention. It was the silence, the unnatural silence. Holmes began his examination immediately, his eyes darting from one corner of the church to the next, taking in everything in a way that was as instinctive to him as breathing. I stayed close, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that coiled in my stomach. At the altar, Holmes paused, his fingers brushing across the stone. "There's something here, Watson," he murmured, "something hidden beneath the surface." I looked around, feeling a growing unease. "Holmes, this place feels wrong, as if it's not even real. How can it be that a church, this church, has been completely erased from memory?" Holmes turned to me, his expression inscrutable. "That is the key, Watson. This place doesn't exist, not in the way you think it does. And McAllister, the priest who once stood here, is another anomaly. His existence has been erased, but not fully. This place, like him, remains, physically present, but absent from the consciousness of those who would remember it." I shook my head, feeling the weight of his words begin to settle on me. "You speak of erasure, of disappearance, but we can see it, we can feel it." "Yes, Watson," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming. "We can, but that does not mean the rest of the world can." There was a sudden rustling sound from the back of the church, a faint echo of something moving. Holmes's hand darted toward his pocket, his fingers closing around the hilt of his cane, his sharp senses already tuned to whatever had disturbed the silence. "Who's there?" Holmes called out, his voice steady but commanding. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a low, strained voice answered, "You shouldn't be here!" The voice came from the shadows, where the flickering light of the lantern could not quite reach. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he moved toward the source of the voice. "And why is that? Who are you?" A figure emerged from the darkness, a man dressed in a tattered black coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. He moved forward, his steps deliberate and slow, as though every action was calculated, a part of some greater plan. "I warned you," the man said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "There are things here that should not be disturbed. McAllister knew too much, and now there are those who wish to ensure it remains forgotten." Holmes tilted his head, studying the man closely. "So it was you, then," he said, his tone tinged with a rare edge of suspicion. "You are the one behind this erasure." The figure took a step back, the shadow of his hat obscuring his face further. "I'm only a servant of the truth you seek, but be warned, some truths, once uncovered, will destroy more than they illuminate." Holmes's eyes never left the man. "Then it seems, sir, that you are the last obstacle in our way." Without another word, the figure disappeared into the shadows, his presence slipping from the room like smoke in the wind. Holmes did not move for a moment, his gaze fixed on the spot where the man had stood. That, Watson, was a warning. A subtle threat, perhaps, but still a warning nonetheless. I looked at Holmes, unease gnawing at my insides. A threat from whom? Holmes's voice was almost a whisper as he spoke, his tone grave. From those who control what is remembered. They will stop at nothing to ensure McAllister's secret remains buried. As I stood there, the weight of the situation pressing down on me, one thing became clearer than ever. We were no longer dealing with a simple mystery. We were tangled in something far darker, something that threatened not just the truth, but our very grasp on reality itself. Chapter 4. The night seemed to stretch on as we left the church behind, the fog thickening around us, as if the very air was trying to swallow our words. Holmes, ever composed, had not uttered a word since our encounter with the mysterious figure. I, however, felt the weight of the moment settle over me like a heavy cloak. The man in the shadows had said something that echoed in my mind. Some truths, once uncovered, will destroy more than they illuminate. Holmes led the way, his long strides pulling me through the murky streets of the East End, past crumbling buildings and dimly lit alleyways. His silence was both reassuring and unnerving. When Holmes was quiet, it was never without purpose. He was formulating, calculating, piecing together the scattered fragments of the puzzle. Finally, after several moments of uninterrupted walking, I spoke, my voice hesitant. "Holmes, what do you make of him, the man we encountered?" Holmes did not immediately respond. His gaze was fixed ahead, his mind seemingly far away, yet his words came with precision. He was no mere messenger, Watson. His words, though cryptic, hold the key. He warned us of the forces we are now up against, forces that are not simply concerned with one man's disappearance. No, Watson, this is much larger. But what is it? I asked, a growing sense of dread creeping into my thoughts. What are they hiding? And why go to such lengths to erase one priest from history? Holmes stopped, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face me. Because Watson, McAllister's confession, his knowledge, has the power to unravel something much older than we can fathom. There are those who do not wish for certain truths to be known, and they will stop at nothing to keep them buried. The chill in the air seemed to deepen as his words hung between us, the weight of them settling over me like an anchor. But Holmes, if they can erase someone from history, can they do the same to us? To our memories? Holmes looked at me, his expression unreadable. I believe we are already seeing the effects of their power, Watson. Consider what has happened since we began investigating. Records have vanished, witnesses forget, places shift in memory. His words struck me harder than I expected. But we remember, don't we? We must remember. We can't allow ourselves to be swept into their manipulation. Holmes placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. Fear not, Watson. I have not forgotten. But we must tread carefully. The more we uncover, the more fragile our grasp on reality becomes. The faint sound of a bell tolling in the distance interrupted our conversation, reminding us that time was slipping away. Holmes, ever the strategist, did not waste a moment. We must return to the church. There is something we missed, something critical that may explain the priest's disappearance. I hesitated, my mind still reeling from the conversation, but Holmes's confidence was enough to push me forward. We made our way back through the winding streets, the fog growing denser with each passing step, until the looming church emerged once more in the distance. It was as though we had stepped back into a different world. The church stood in front of us, seemingly unchanged, yet something felt wrong. The atmosphere had shifted. It was as if the very air around it had thickened, and the shadows seemed to hold secrets of their own. As we approached the church doors, Holmes took a long, slow breath, his eyes scanning the surroundings with an intensity that only he could muster. "We are not alone, Watson. I can feel it." I glanced around, my senses heightened. "But there is no one here." Holmes stepped closer to the door and placed his hand on the old wood, his fingers brushing the grain. "Not physically, no. But there are forces at play here, forces we have yet to understand fully." The moment his fingers made contact with the door, a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. I froze, my pulse quickening. Holmes looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "This church, Watson, is a nexus, a place where the fabric of reality is thin. McAllister's confession is tied to it, and I suspect that the forces we are dealing with are tied to this very building." I swallowed hard. "What are you suggesting?" Holmes's voice dropped to a near whisper, his words cutting through the fog like a sharp blade. "That McAllister's confession is not just a simple admission of guilt, Watson. It is a key, and it is hidden here, in this very church." We pushed the doors open, stepping into the darkness beyond. The church was eerily silent, the only sound our footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. The altar, now draped in shadow, loomed ahead, and I felt an overwhelming sense of unease settle in my chest. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning every corner, every inch of the church. He paused by the altar and knelt, brushing his fingers over the stone floor. I watched in silence, wondering what he was searching for. After a moment, he straightened, his face a mixture of intrigue and frustration. "It's not here, but there is something, a trace." I stepped closer, my curiosity piqued. "A trace of what?" "A trace of McAllister's presence," Holmes replied, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "We must search the walls. There is something hidden here, something that was left behind." As I moved to help Holmes with his search, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was as if the very church itself was alive, its walls breathing with secrets, and I could feel the weight of those secrets pressing down on us. Chapter 5. The church felt colder now, as if the shadows themselves had taken on a life of their own. Every corner seemed to hold something hidden, something we weren't meant to see. Holmes moved with a quiet urgency, his eyes sharp and methodical, as though he was searching for a truth that refused to reveal itself. I followed closely behind, my senses on edge. The silence in the church was thick, oppressive, and every sound, every footstep, every rustle seemed to reverberate through the stone walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but when I glanced around, there was no one there. Holmes stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing as they scanned the far wall. "There," he murmured, his voice low, as if he had uncovered something far beyond the ordinary. I moved closer to him, my heart racing. "What is it?" Holmes reached out, his fingers brushing the cold stone of the wall. "Look closely, Watson. Can you see it?" I squinted, focusing on the area where he was pointing. At first, there was nothing remarkable about it, just the usual cracks in the stone, worn from centuries of neglect. But then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible symbol etched into the wall, hidden beneath layers of dust and grime. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. "What is that? It doesn't look like anything I've seen before." Holmes studied the mark carefully. It's an ancient symbol, Watson. One tied to a secret order. An order that has been manipulating history for centuries. This is a marker, a sigil, left behind to show their influence. My mind raced. Are you suggesting that this order, whoever they are, was responsible for McAllister's erasure from history? Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the symbol. Precisely. McAllister was not simply a man who disappeared. He was someone targeted by this group, someone whose knowledge was a threat to their control. And now they've gone to great lengths to make sure he is forgotten, to ensure that no one remembers the truth. I felt a chill wash over me, deeper than the cold that had already settled in the church. But what truth, Holmes? What could he have known that's so dangerous? Holmes turned to face me, his expression grave. The truth about them, Watson. The truth about this group that has been manipulating history, erasing and altering events, controlling the narrative of our very past. McAllister was a part of something larger, and he knew that their power, this power, was not confined to one man or one moment in time. I shuddered. It sounds like madness. How can such a thing even exist? A secret order that controls history itself? It exists, Watson, Holmes said, his voice low and steady, and we are now caught in their web. The question is, how far will they go to ensure their secrets remain buried? I glanced around the church, feeling the weight of the walls pressing in on me. As though they were closing in, hiding something just out of reach. What do we do now? Holmes paused, his mind clearly working through the next steps, as though he were weighing every possibility. We need to understand the full scope of their plan. McAllister's confession, his final words, will be the key. If we can uncover them, we may be able to stop them, or at the very least, expose them. But where do we begin? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. How do we even know what he confessed to? Or if it's even here? Holmes gave a slight cryptic smile. We begin with the obvious, Watson. McAllister left us a trail, whether we can see it or not. And this church, this place, is the foundation of that trail. If we search long enough, carefully enough, we will find the confession. The weight of his words hung between us, and for a moment I thought I could feel the very walls of the church shifting, the very air thickening, as though the building itself were a participant in the mystery unfolding around us. Holmes continued his search, inspecting the walls, the altar, the pews, looking for anything that would reveal McAllister's confession. I moved to the altar, my fingers brushing over the worn wood of the podium, and then across the surface of the stone. My hand froze as I touched something unusual. A slight indentation in the stone, as if the surface had been disturbed not long ago. "Holmes!" I called out, my voice trembling with anticipation. "Here, there's something." Holmes was immediately at my side, his eyes narrowing as he examined the spot where my hand rested. "Ah, I see it, a hidden compartment." With a swift motion, Holmes pressed his fingers into the indentation, and a soft click echoed through the church. Slowly, the stone began to shift, revealing a small hidden compartment beneath the altar. Inside the compartment was a faded leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. Holmes took it carefully, as though handling a fragile artifact, and flipped open to the first page. His eyes flickered across the words, his expression unreadable. "Well, Watson," he said quietly, "it seems our priest had more to say than we could have imagined." I leaned in, eager to see the confession, but Holmes held it out of reach for a moment. "This," he said, his voice low with intensity, "is not merely a confession. It is a warning." Chapter 6. Holmes held the journal with the reverence of someone unearthing a long-buried secret, the weight of its contents far beyond its physical mass. The leather was cracked, the edges of the pages curled with age, but still the faint ink of McAllister's handwriting was legible. I could sense that whatever lay within those pages would mark the turning point of this investigation, perhaps even our very perception of reality. He turned to the first page, his eyes flicking over the words with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I stepped closer, feeling the oppressive silence of the church settle deeper around us. "What does it say, Holmes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would somehow disturb the fragile atmosphere. Holmes didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the page, and I could see his mind working. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and filled with a quiet gravity. "McAllister speaks of an ancient society," he said, his eyes still fixed on the words. "A group of men who have been manipulating the course of history for centuries. He calls them the custodians of the forgotten. Their purpose, as he describes it, is to ensure that certain truths are erased from existence, truths that would disrupt the delicate fabric of the world as we know it." I frowned, trying to make sense of the strange and unsettling revelation. The custodians of the forgotten? What truths are they erasing, Holmes? And why go to such lengths to conceal them? Holmes closed the journal with a deliberate motion, his fingers brushing the cover one last time before he met my gaze. "The truth, Watson, is something they fear. They fear the knowledge that certain events, certain people, have the power to unravel everything they've carefully constructed." McAllister was, in essence, a whistleblower. He had uncovered their existence, their manipulation of history, and in doing so, he became a threat. That is why he was erased. I felt a cold shiver creep up my spine. Erased? But how does one erase a person, Holmes? How can they remove someone from existence itself? Holmes's eyes darkened, his mind clearly working through the implications. "It is not as simple as erasing a name from a ledger, Watson. No, this is far more insidious. The custodians have the ability to rewrite history itself, altering memories, distorting facts, and erasing anyone who might challenge their control. It is a power that exists in the shadows, a power that bends the very fabric of time and memory to its will." I swallowed hard, my mind struggling to keep pace with the enormity of what Holmes was suggesting. But if they can do this, if they can alter history, what's to stop them from erasing us? What's to stop them from rewriting our memories, making us part of their lie? Holmes's gaze sharpened, his eyes flashing with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "That, Watson, is exactly what we must prevent. If we allow this to continue, if we fail to stop them, they will rewrite our understanding of reality itself. We will not merely forget the truth, they will make sure it never existed at all." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, the realization of what was at stake finally sinking in. "Then we must act quickly," I said, my voice tight with determination. "We can't let them continue their work. We have to find a way to stop them before it's too late." Holmes nodded, his expression grave. "Indeed, Watson, but it won't be easy. The custodians are not easily defeated, and they will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way. But we have one advantage. They underestimate us. They think we are just two men, two ordinary men, caught up in something beyond our understanding, but they are wrong." I felt a surge of confidence as Holmes spoke, his voice steady and unwavering. Despite the overwhelming odds, I knew that as long as we stood together, we could unravel this mystery, no matter how twisted or dangerous it became. Holmes turned the journal over in his hands, his fingers lightly tracing the edges. "There's more, Watson. McAllister has left us a trail, clues hidden within these pages that may lead us to the heart of the custodian's operation. We must follow it." I nodded, the urgency of the situation suddenly feeling all too real. "Where do we begin?" Holmes's eyes flicked toward the altar, his gaze intense. McAllister wrote of a meeting, a place where the custodians gather to discuss their plans. It's called the Hollow Hall, a location known only to a few. But he's left us a clue, a symbol, a marker that will lead us there. I felt a ripple of unease, but also a spark of hope. The Hollow Hall? How do we find it? Holmes turned the journal to the next page, revealing a map, a crude, yet unmistakable sketch of a location within the city. "Here, Watson. This is where we must go. It is not far from here, hidden in plain sight, and once we find it, we may be able to confront the custodians themselves." I studied the map closely, my mind racing with possibilities. "And once we confront them, Holmes, what then?" Holmes's smile was faint, but it carried a grim determination. "We expose them. We reveal the truth, no matter the cost. Because, Watson, some truths are too dangerous to be forgotten." The weight of his words hung between us, and as we prepared to leave the church, the fog outside seemed to deepen, as though the city itself was holding its breath. We were walking towards something we could not yet fully comprehend, something that could change everything we thought we knew. And I felt a strange, unsettling certainty that when we reached the Hollow Hall, we would uncover not just the truth, but a terrible reality that might never let us go. Chapter 7. The fog had not lifted as we made our way through the darkened streets of London. If anything, it had grown thicker, like a physical manifestation of the mystery that had been tightening its grip on us. The map Holmes had uncovered was now folded in my pocket, its edges worn from handling. I could feel the weight of the task ahead pressing down on me, but there was no turning back. The path we had embarked upon had already led us too far into the unknown. Holmes walked ahead, his stride quick and purposeful, as though he were guided by some invisible thread. His mind was a whirlwind of deductions and calculations, and I knew that his every movement was deliberate, measured. The Hollow Hall, according to the map, was not far from here, nestled in a forgotten corner of the city, hidden in plain sight. A place that only those who knew how to look would ever find. "Holmes," I said, my voice cutting through the silence that surrounded us, "do you truly believe McAllister's confession will lead us to the heart of this conspiracy?" Holmes did not pause in his steps, but his answer was immediate. "I have no doubt, Watson. McAllister was one of the few who managed to uncover the truth, however fragmentary. He left us a trail for a reason. We are meant to follow it, but be prepared, Watson. This will not be easy." The tension in the air was palpable. Every turn, every shadow seemed to hold some unknown threat. It was as though the city itself was conspiring against us, each alleyway and building a potential trap laid by the custodians. The very notion of them, this ancient secret order capable of rewriting history itself, seemed so ludicrous and terrifying that I struggled to wrap my mind around it. We arrived at the location marked on the map. A narrow, nondescript building tucked between two taller structures. The door was weathered, the paint peeling, and the windows were obscured by layers of grime. It looked as though it had been forgotten by time itself, just like the secrets it held within. Holmes approached the door without hesitation, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. I followed close behind, my pulse quickening. The air here was thick, suffocating, and I could feel my own thoughts becoming clouded by the oppressive atmosphere. Holmes reached for the door, his fingers brushing over the handle. The moment he touched it, I felt a shift in the air, a sudden, unnatural stillness. It was as if the building had been holding its breath, waiting for us to enter. With a soft creak, the door opened, revealing a dimly lit interior. The room beyond was vast, its walls lined with shelves and old, dusty books. The air inside smelled of stale parchment and decay, and a faint echo of distant voices seemed to reverberate through the space, though there was no one there. It was as if the room itself was alive, haunted by memories that had been buried long ago. Holmes stepped inside first, his eyes scanning the room with the intensity of someone searching for a hidden truth. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the doorframe, before following him into the darkness. "This place," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "It feels wrong, Holmes, like it doesn't belong here." Holmes turned to face me, his expression grim. "Because it doesn't, Watson. This is no ordinary building. It is a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the custodians gather, where they discuss their plans and protect their secrets." I looked around, my unease growing. But why here? Why such an unassuming place? Surely they could have hidden their operations somewhere more secure. "They are not hiding, Watson," Holmes replied. "They are manipulating. This building, this room, it is a place of power precisely because it appears so ordinary. People walk past it every day without a second thought, and that is the illusion they rely on." I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. The custodians were not just manipulating history, they were manipulating perception itself. And now we were standing in the very heart of their operation, a place that existed outside the bounds of normality, where the rules of reality were bent to suit their needs. As Holmes moved further into the room, his gaze fixed on a large ornate desk at the far end. I could feel something pulling at the edges of my mind. There was a sense of inevitability here, like we were on the verge of discovering something that would change everything. But what? Holmes reached the desk and began to examine the various objects scattered across its surface. Papers, books, and odd trinkets lay in disarray, as though someone had left in a hurry. Holmes picked up a small book, its pages yellowed with age, and flicked through it with practiced ease. "This," he said, his voice sharp with excitement, "is the key. A ledger of sorts, detailing the members of the custodians and their activities." I moved, closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Can we use it to find them? To stop them?" Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the pages. "It may give us the names we need, but it won't be enough. The custodians are careful, too careful. They will have already anticipated our next move." A chill ran down my spine. "Then what do we do now?" Holmes set the ledger down carefully and turned to face me, his expression resolute. "Now, Watson, we prepare for the next phase. The custodians are not finished with us. They may have erased McAllister from history, but they will not be able to erase us. Not as long as we remain one step ahead." We stood there, the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. I could feel the darkness closing in, but there was something else. Something flickering just at the edges of my mind. A faint glimmer of hope. We had found the first piece of the puzzle, but the road ahead was still shrouded in mystery. Chapter 8. The ledger lay open on the desk between us. its pages yellowed with age, and its contents cryptic. Holmes had been reading it with such intensity that I hesitated to disturb him. I could feel the weight of the custodian's secret pressing in on us, and I knew that every moment we spent here brought us closer to an understanding of their twisted influence. But what was the price of that knowledge? Could we truly outwit them, or were we already caught in their web? "Holmes," I said finally, my voice breaking the silence, "what's in the ledger? Can it tell us who these custodians are?" Holmes did not look up immediately, his gaze still fixed on the text. He was reading carefully, each word processed with the same meticulousness he brought to every case. "This," he said, his voice low, "is a history written in shadows, Watson. It details the rise of the custodians, how they've altered events, erased key figures from history, and inserted themselves into the fabric of time. Their power is staggering." "Then we can stop them, can't we?" I asked, a surge of hope rising in my chest. Holmes closed the ledger with a decisive motion, setting it aside. "Stopping them will not be as simple as knowing their names, Watson. They operate in ways we cannot yet understand. Their methods are more than just physical manipulation. They alter perceptions, twist memories, even change the way people think. It's not enough to confront them head-on." I frowned, struggling to grasp the enormity of what he was saying. "But surely we can expose them, reveal the truth to the world?" "That," Holmes said, "would be exactly what they want us to do." The statement sent a chill through me. "What do you mean? Why would they want us to expose them?" Holmes's eyes hardened, and for a brief moment I saw the familiar gleam of calculation in his gaze. "Because, Watson, the truth is malleable. It can be distorted, bent, and even erased. If we reveal what we know, they will twist it, discredit it, and rewrite history to ensure their hold on power remains unbroken. The truth, once exposed, becomes their greatest weapon." I took a step back, the weight of his words sinking in. "Then what should we do?" Holmes stood, his posture tall and rigid. "We must find the heart of their operation. If we can uncover the source of their power, this manipulation of time, memory, and history itself, we might have a chance of stopping them." A moment of silence stretched between us, the air thick with tension. I knew that we were on the brink of something monumental, but I also understood that it might cost us everything to uncover the full extent of this mystery. The custodians were not simply men. They were a force of nature, bending the world to their will. Suddenly, Holmes turned toward the door, his eyes sharp. "We don't have much time, Watson. They are aware of us now. We've made our move, and they will be preparing theirs. We need to leave this place before it's too late." I nodded, and we quickly made our way out of the room, the heavy door creaking shut behind us. The building, once seemingly forgotten, now felt like a tomb, as if it had been waiting for us to uncover its secrets. I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched by forces we couldn't even comprehend. As we stepped back into the foggy streets of London, I found myself wondering if we had made a mistake. Had we ventured too far into a realm where even Holmes couldn't predict the outcome? Holmes, seemingly unfazed, strode ahead with his usual confidence, though his pace was quickened. "We need to find the next piece of the puzzle, Watson. McAllister's confession was only the beginning. There's more to uncover, more to understand." "But where do we go from here?" I asked, trying to focus on the present. "How do we find the heart of this operation?" Holmes paused, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, where the faint glow of gaslights pierced the fog. "There's a place, the Forgotten Vault. It's where the custodians keep their most important secrets. If we can gain access to it, we'll find the answers we need." "The Forgotten Vault?" I repeated, the name sending a shiver down my spine. "Where is it?" Holmes turned to me with a grim smile. "In plain sight, Watson. They hide it where no one dares to look." The cryptic nature of his words unsettled me, but I had learned long ago that Holmes did not speak without purpose. If he said this vault existed, then it did. The question now was how to access it. What could be hidden within its walls that would be so dangerous, so powerful, that even the custodians had deemed it worthy of protection? We moved quickly, our steps muffled by the thick fog that seemed to envelop everything. The city was alive with whispers of the past, of the present, and of something far darker than we could comprehend. And somewhere, in the depths of it all, was the key to stopping the custodians before they erased everything. But as we moved through the streets, I could feel something else, something subtle, yet undeniable, a shift. It was as if reality itself was beginning to blur, as though the world we knew was not quite as solid as we had believed. The streets seemed to stretch on, unfamiliar and foreign, despite the fact that we had walked them countless times before. It was as if the city itself were conspiring against us. Holmes's voice broke through the disorienting sensation. "Do not doubt what we are doing, Watson. We are not alone in this fight, and the truth will come to light, one way or another." But as we continued on, I couldn't help but wonder, what if the truth was not meant to be uncovered? What if in searching for it, we were unraveling something far more dangerous than we could ever have imagined? Chapter 9. The fog thickened as we moved deeper into the heart of London. Every step seemed to take us further from the world we knew, each alley, each turn more unfamiliar than the last. It was as though the very streets were shifting beneath our feet, intentionally veiling the path ahead. I could feel the ground beneath me slipping away, as if the fabric of reality itself were being twisted, bending to forces I could scarcely comprehend. Holmes walked ahead, his posture unshaken, as though he were entirely immune to the strange sense of disorientation that had begun to claw at my nerves. His pace was steady, purposeful, his sharp eyes scanning every detail of the surroundings with the intensity of a man who saw beyond the ordinary. "Holmes," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. "The streets, they're different. Everything feels off. It's as if the city is playing tricks on us." Holmes glanced over his shoulder, his expression as calm as ever. "It is, Watson. The custodians do not just alter memories, they warp reality itself. They make you doubt what you see, what you know. They want you to question everything, to second-guess your every step. But we cannot afford that luxury." I swallowed hard, but his words anchored me. If anyone could navigate this distorted reality, it was Holmes. And if he believed we were still on the right path, then I had no choice but to follow. We came to a halt in front of a building, its stone facade worn and aged by time. To an unknowing eye, it appeared as nothing more than another decaying structure in a forgotten corner of London. But there was something about it, something that whispered of secrets long buried. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Forgotten Vault." I studied the building, my mind racing to make sense of the situation. If this was indeed the vault the custodians had used to protect their most dangerous secrets, then we were about to uncover something that could change everything. But what price would we pay for that knowledge? Holmes reached for the door, his fingers brushing over the rusted handle, and pushed it open with little more than a soft creak. The room beyond was dark, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. I hesitated, unsure of what we might find within, but Holmes stepped inside without a moment's hesitation. The door closed behind us with a resounding thud, cutting off the world outside. We were alone now, in a place where the custodians had hidden their darkest truths. The interior was vast, far larger than the exterior had suggested. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tomes and scrolls, ancient texts, maps, and documents, each one carefully preserved, each one holding a fragment of history long forgotten. But it wasn't the books that caught my attention. It was the center of the room, where a large wooden table stood. Upon it lay a series of strange, arcane objects, their purpose unclear, but their presence undeniable. Holmes moved forward, his eyes scanning everything with a practiced efficiency. "This is where the custodians have kept their most dangerous secrets, Watson. They've altered the course of history here. They've hidden the truth from the world." I stepped closer, my eyes drawn to the objects on the table. There was a strange, metallic device. A compass, perhaps, though its design was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Next to it lay a cracked mirror, its surface reflecting not our faces, but something else, distorted, shifting, like a glimpse of a world that shouldn't exist. Holmes picked up the compass with the same caution he used when handling delicate evidence. "This device, Watson, is not just a tool, it's a key to understanding how they've been able to manipulate reality itself." I frowned, trying to make sense of his words. A key to what, and how does it work? Holmes set the compass back on the table, his gaze lingering on it for a moment before he turned to face me. "The custodians use these objects to anchor themselves in reality. They aren't just erasing memories or rewriting history. They are altering the very fabric of time. They use devices like this to shift events, to make certain things never happen, or to make things appear as though they've always been." I felt the weight of his words sinking in. "Are you saying they've been changing history itself? All this time?" "Exactly," Holmes said, his voice growing sharper. "Everything we think we know, every fact we take for granted, has been shaped by them. They've rewritten the past to fit their agenda. And now they've come after McAllister because he was the first to see the truth. He was the first to realize the extent of their power." I took a step back, my mind racing. "So, what now? How do we stop them?" Holmes's eyes were filled with the intensity of a man on the brink of a discovery. "We find the heart of their operation, Watson. We expose the mechanism they use to control time, to rewrite history. And we destroy it." The gravity of his words was enough to pull me out of my thoughts. "But how do we do that? We're standing in the very place where they've hidden their most dangerous secrets. We're up against something we don't even understand." Holmes smiled grimly. "Precisely. And that is why we must act quickly. The more we learn, the more dangerous they will become. We are on the precipice, Watson, and we must not falter." He turned back to the table, his eyes scanning the objects before him. "There is a pattern to these objects, Watson. A sequence that will reveal their plan if we can decipher it." I felt a surge of hope mixed with unease. We had found the heart of the custodian's power, but now the real work began. We had to unlock their secrets before they locked us out of reality itself. Chapter 10. The air in the forgotten vault had become dense, oppressive, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something, or perhaps more accurately, waiting for us. My pulse quickened. the weight of our discoveries growing heavier by the moment. Holmes moved with deliberate purpose around the table, his hands tracing over the strange objects scattered across its surface. There was an unshakable certainty in his movements, but it did little to quell the gnawing sense of dread that had settled in my chest. I stepped closer, my eyes drawn to the peculiar compass. Its design was unlike any device I had encountered before, a swirling pattern etched into the brass casing, faintly glowing as though alive. Beside it, the cracked mirror seemed to pulse with an eerie light, distorting reflections with each passing second. I felt the pull of its gaze, as if it beckoned us to understand its secrets, even as I resisted the urge to step closer. "Holmes," I began, my voice hoarse with uncertainty, "what exactly are we dealing with here? These objects, they don't feel like mere tools. They feel alive." Holmes did not look up immediately, but his expression softened with something akin to empathy. "You are right, Watson. These are not mere tools. They are anchors. Anchors that tether the custodians to the fabric of reality itself. By manipulating these objects, they can alter events, bend time, and even erase people from history. They do not simply observe history, they shape it." I swallowed hard, my mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of what he was saying. "But how does it work, Holmes? How do they control time with these objects?" Holmes's gaze turned to the compass, his fingers lingering on its surface. "I believe the compass holds the answer, Watson. The pattern etched into its casing is a map of the key moments in history that the custodians have altered. Every line, every swirl, corresponds to a specific event, an event they have reshaped or erased." I felt a surge of dread. And if we follow the map, if we trace the path of their manipulation, will it lead us to the heart of their own power? To the source of their control? Holmes looked up at me, his expression grim but resolute. "That is what we must discover, Watson, but we cannot afford to waste time. The more we know, the more dangerous they will become. They are aware of our presence now, and they will not hesitate to act." The weight of his words sank in, and I could feel the air around us growing thicker, as though the very walls of the vault were closing in on us. My thoughts raced. We were not simply dealing with a criminal organization or a group of conspirators. We were facing a force that could alter the very fabric of reality, an entity capable of erasing history itself. And if they could do that, what was left for us? What was left for the truth? Holmes turned to the mirror, his eyes narrowing as he studied the distorted reflection of the room before him. "This mirror, Watson, is no ordinary object. It is a tool used by the custodians to manipulate perception. What we see in it is not what is real. It is what they want us to see." I stepped closer, cautiously. As I gazed into the mirror, I saw not myself or Holmes, but a shifting scene, a moment in time that felt familiar, yet distant. It was a crowded street in London, the hustle and bustle of the city alive with activity. But then, as though the scene were a painting on the verge of decay, the image began to fade, the figures vanishing into the mist, their faces blurring and distorting. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "What am I seeing?" Holmes's voice was calm, but there was a sharpness in his tone. "What you see is a distortion of memory, a place, an event that has been erased from history. The custodians use these mirrors to make sure that no one remembers what they've changed. They can alter perceptions, rewrite events, and ensure that the past is never questioned." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. And if they can erase the past, Can they erase us as well? Holmes met my gaze with a somber look. That, Watson, is exactly what they will attempt to do. We are already at risk of being forgotten, of being rewritten. But we must not allow that to happen. Not now, not when we are so close to uncovering the truth. I nodded, though my mind was filled with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. How could we possibly confront an enemy that could erase us from history itself? How could we fight against forces that existed beyond time and memory? Holmes turned back to the compass, his fingers tracing the intricate pattern on its surface. There is a way forward, Watson. This compass, this key, will guide us to the heart of the custodian's power. But we must be careful. Once we follow its path, there will be no turning back. I glanced at him, uncertainty gnawing at me. And what happens when we reach the heart, Holmes? What will we find there? Holmes gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. What we find there, Watson, will determine not just our future, but the future of everything. The words hung heavy in the air, their weight almost unbearable. I could feel the tension building, the stakes rising higher with every passing second. The truth was within our reach, but it came with a price we could not yet understand. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear that the custodians would stop at nothing to ensure that we never uncovered their secrets. And that, Watson, would make our journey far more dangerous than either of us had anticipated. Holmes placed the compass down, turning toward the door. We move forward, Watson. There is no other choice. I followed him, my mind racing. We were stepping deeper into the unknown, where even the laws of time and reality could not be trusted. And as we left the vault behind us, the fog seemed to close in, as though it, too, were waiting for us to uncover its secrets. Chapter 11. The night had fallen deep over London, the fog now so thick it felt as though we were walking through a dream. Every step we took seemed to bring us closer to a place where even time itself began to bend and warp. I could feel the shift, the disquieting sensation that the world we were walking through was not the same as the one we had known. Holmes was leading the way, his pace unyielding, his mind as sharp and clear as ever. Yet there was something in his eyes, something in the set of his jaw, that told me the gravity of what lay ahead was weighing on him more than he cared to admit. I followed, my thoughts swirling with the unsettling revelations we had uncovered. The custodians were not just a secret order, they were a force, a power that had manipulated history itself. They had erased people, events, entire realities, and now we were standing on the precipice of confronting them. The heart of their operation was within our reach, and yet with each passing moment, the danger we faced grew ever more tangible. "What's our next move, Holmes?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence that had settled around us. Holmes glanced at me, his eyes dark but resolute. "We must find their centre of power, Watson. We have the key, the compass. It will guide us to the heart of the custodian's influence." "But where does it lead?" I pressed. "How can we possibly stop them once we find it?" Holmes's gaze turned ahead, his focus narrowing as if he could see beyond the fog, beyond the very buildings themselves. "The key, Watson, doesn't just lead us to a place, it leads us to a moment where the custodian's power is concentrated. If we can disrupt that moment, we can stop them." I shook my head, trying to grasp the enormity of what he was saying. "A moment? You mean time itself?" "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice low but steady. "The custodians are not bound by the ordinary flow of time. They can reshape it, distort it, and in doing so, they can erase entire histories." But if we find that point in time, where their power is anchored, we can sever their control. We continued down the fog-cloaked streets, the sound of our footsteps muted by the thick mist that clung to every surface. Despite the dread that lingered at the edges of my mind, I trusted Holmes. He had never steered us wrong before, and if anyone could find a way to disrupt the custodian's manipulation of time, it was him. At last, we arrived at a narrow alleyway, wedged between two towering buildings. The compass in Holmes's hand began to hum faintly, its needle spinning erratically before it steadied, pointing directly down the alley. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of their power lies just ahead. We are close, Watson, very close." I followed him down the alley, the air growing colder with each step. The feeling of being watched, of being drawn into something much larger than ourselves, intensified. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave the custodians to their machinations, but I knew there was no choice. We had come too far to retreat now. At the end of the alley stood a door, inconspicuous, yet somehow imposing. The wood was aged, the iron handle darkened by time, but it was not the door itself that sent a chill down my spine. It was the sensation of power emanating from within. This was no ordinary threshold. It was a barrier to something far greater, a place where the very fabric of reality was held in check. Holmes approached the door with the calm precision of a man who knew exactly what to expect. He reached out and grasped the handle, but before he could turn it, I stepped forward, my hand on his arm. "Holmes, what if we can't stop them? What if this is bigger than us?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain steady. Holmes looked at me, his eyes searching mine for a moment before he nodded. "We've already uncovered too much to turn back now, Watson. The custodians have rewritten history to suit their desires. But some truths cannot be erased, not by them, and not by anyone. We will expose their lies, no matter the cost." His words, though heavy with resolve, did little to quell the unease gnawing at me. We were about to confront something that defied all logic, something that could unravel everything we thought we knew about the world. With a final glance at me, Holmes turned the handle and pushed open the door. What lay beyond was a room unlike any I had ever seen. It was vast, circular, with walls made of polished stone that seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural energy. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested an ancient ornate clock. Its hands were frozen, but I could feel its presence, the heartbeat of the custodian's power. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice reverberating in the stillness of the room. "The source of their control, the heart of time itself." I looked at the clock, a sense of dread creeping over me. The custodians had not only manipulated history, they had found a way to control time itself. And now we stood before the very instrument of their power. Holmes stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the clock. "We must disrupt it, Watson. If we can stop this clock, if we can sever its hold on time, the custodian's influence will crumble." I watched him, my heart pounding in my chest, as he reached out toward the clock. But as his fingers brushed the surface, a sharp echoing sound filled the room, the sound of the clock's hands beginning to move. Time was shifting, and the custodians had just realized we were here. Chapter 12. The room seemed to close in around us as the sound of the clock's hands turning echoed in the stillness. I could feel the pulse of time itself shifting, its rhythm becoming erratic, as though reality itself were buckling under the weight of what was happening. The custodians had known we were here, had been waiting for us, but now, with the clock's hands in motion, I feared we had stepped too far into their domain. Holmes, his expression unwavering, stepped closer to the clock, his fingers hovering just above its surface. "This is it, Watson. We've reached the tipping point. If we disrupt this mechanism, we can stop them. But if we fail—" His voice trailed off, the implications too dire to finish. I nodded grimly, understanding all too well the stakes we faced. We had come so far to unearth the truth, to expose the lies the custodians had woven into history. But now that we were at the heart of their power, it felt as though the very essence of time itself was slipping through our fingers. I watched as Holmes carefully studied the clock, his mind racing to calculate the next step. It was unlike any timepiece I had ever seen, its gears intricate, its design far more complex than a mere instrument of measurement. The clock, I realized, was not simply a device to mark hours. It was a conduit, a bridge to something much more powerful. A way for the custodians to manipulate the flow of time, to bend events to their will. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight with anxiety, "how do we stop it? How do we destroy it?" Holmes didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the spinning hands. His eyes narrowed, as though he were searching for a flaw, a weakness in the design of the clock that could offer us a chance. "It's not just about stopping it, Watson. We need to break its connection to the custodians. If we don't sever their hold, if we don't disrupt the very source of their power, it will all be for nothing." The room felt colder now, the air growing thick with the weight of our task. Time was shifting around us, distorting, bending, and I could feel the presence of the custodians growing stronger. I couldn't see them, but their influence was palpable, pressing against the edges of my mind, threatening to pull me into a reality I could not understand. I glanced at Holmes, whose jaw was clenched with determination. "What do we need to do, Holmes? How can we stop them?" Holmes took a deep breath, his fingers twitching as he finally reached out to touch the clock. The instant his hand made contact, I felt a jolt of energy ripple through the room, a surge of power that seemed to distort the very air around us. "This clock is the anchor, Watson," Holmes said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "We need to disrupt its connection to the custodians. The key is in the gears, the intricate interlocking mechanisms that bind time itself to their control." I stepped closer, my eyes focused on the clock's spinning hands. "But how do we even begin? The mechanism is so complex we can't just dismantle it." Holmes smiled faintly, a glimmer of the old calculating brilliance shining through. "No, Watson, we don't dismantle it, we disrupt it. There's a point of weakness, a flaw in the design. All great systems have one, no matter how carefully constructed." His fingers moved with precision, tracing a pattern along the edge of the clock's frame. I watched, my heart pounding, as he gently turned a hidden lever. There was a soft, almost imperceptible click, and for a brief moment the clock's hands froze, suspended in time. The room seemed to hold its breath. "Now," Holmes said, his voice low and filled with tension. "Now, we sever the connection." Before I could react, Holmes pulled a small device from his coat pocket, a small metal contraption that I had never seen before. He pressed it into a small socket beneath the clock's surface, and the entire room seemed to vibrate with an intense hum. The clock's hands jerked to life once more, but this time they moved backward slowly at first, and then faster, faster than I could comprehend. The sound of the ticking grew deafening, a rhythmic, relentless pulse that threatened to overwhelm me. The walls of the room seemed to ripple, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before our eyes. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice steady even as the room shook. "The clock is breaking down. The custodian's grip on time is weakening." But as the clock continued to reverse, I saw something in the mirror, the same distorted image I had seen earlier. The figures in the reflection were no longer blurred. They were now clear, moving in and out of focus as though the past was being rewritten before my very eyes. The custodians were reacting. I could feel their presence now, like shadows creeping at the edges of the room, pulling at the very seams of our reality. "We need to move, Watson!" Holmes shouted, his voice rising over the chaos. "Now!" In that instant, everything seemed to fall away. Time fractured, splintering into 1,000 different directions, and I felt myself being pulled in every direction at once. My mind raced, struggling to hold on to something, anything that felt real. Then, with a final, deafening crash, the clock shattered. The room fell, silent. For a moment, I thought I had gone deaf. The vibrations had stopped, the hum was gone, and everything around me was still. The fog outside had cleared, and the weight pressing down on me had lifted. The world was normal again. I turned to Holmes, who stood unmoving in the centre of the room, his face pale but resolute. "We did it, Watson," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "The custodians have lost their hold on time." I glanced around the room, my heart still pounding in my chest. The mirror no longer showed shifting images. The books and artifacts were still there, but the oppressive aura that had once filled the room was gone. "We've won, then?" I asked, though a nagging doubt still lingered. Holmes nodded, his gaze distant. "For now, Watson, but the true cost of this victory has yet to be revealed." The future, it seemed, was still uncertain. Chapter 13. The silence that followed the destruction of the clock was absolute. For a moment, I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. The custodians, the secret order that had manipulated the course of history, had been stopped. Their grip on time, memory, and reality itself had shattered along with the clock. But as the weight of the moment began to settle on me, I couldn't help but wonder. Had we truly won? Or had we simply altered the course of history in ways we would never fully understand? Holmes stood across from me, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of triumph and weariness. There was something in his gaze, something deeper than the simple relief of victory. It was as though he had already begun to see the implications of what we had done, and the uncertainty that lay ahead. "We've done it, Watson," Holmes said quietly, his voice steady, though there was a faint edge to it. "The custodians no longer have power over time. The clock is gone, and with it, their influence." I nodded, though the unease in my chest had not lifted. "But what now, Holmes? What happens to the truth we've uncovered?" Holmes turned to face me fully, his gaze intense. "That, Watson, is the true cost of what we've done. The truth of the custodians, of their manipulation of history, of the power they held over reality, has been wiped away. In severing their hold on time, we've removed the foundation on which their existence was built." I swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. "You mean we can never remember them? No one will ever know what happened, what we've done?" "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice low. "The custodians were the keepers of a reality that never truly existed. And now that we've destroyed their instruments, that reality has collapsed. The world will forget them, Watson. We will forget them." A shiver ran down my spine as the full scope of what Holmes was saying began to sink in. "You mean Our memories of this will be erased. The truth we uncovered, all the danger we faced, everything we've learned, it will vanish? Holmes gave a grim nod. That's the price we must pay for disrupting their control. By breaking their connection to time, we've severed the threads of memory as well. We've stopped their manipulation, but at the cost of our own recollections. I felt a wave of disorientation wash over me. How could we have fought so hard for the truth, only to have it stolen from us? How could we have exposed a reality that would now slip through our fingers like sand? Is there no way to preserve what we've learned? I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. Holmes met my gaze, his eyes somber. Perhaps there is, but I fear it would come at an even greater cost. We could write down our experiences, leave records behind for future generations, but they, too, would be erased in time. The only way to preserve what we've discovered is to allow it to fade with us, and let history move forward without the weight of the past clouding its view. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room, once filled with the hum of the clock's gears and the weight of the custodian's power, now felt eerily still, as though it had been abandoned by all but us. The silence between us was not comforting, it was suffocating. We had won, yes, but at what cost? Holmes, I said, my voice thick with the gravity of what I was about to ask, will we forget everything? Will we forget them? Holmes hesitated, his eyes drifting toward the door as if the answer lay somewhere beyond it. Yes, Watson, we will forget them. We will forget the clock. We will forget the custodians, the manipulations, and even our own actions. But there is one thing that I will not forget. I turned toward him, confused. What is it, Holmes? Holmes met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of the man I had come to know. The brilliant detective, the man who had always understood the mysteries of the world better than anyone else. I will not forget why we fought, Watson, why we uncovered the truth. We fought not for ourselves, not for glory, but for the simple right to know what was real. His words struck me with an unexpected force, and for the first time since our journey had begun, I realized something profound. The truth, our quest for it, wasn't about keeping the knowledge for ourselves. It was about uncovering the lies that had held the world captive. And perhaps, even if we were to forget, the simple act of uncovering the truth would always remain with us. But the world will forget, I said quietly, my thoughts still swirling. Everything we've done will vanish with us. Perhaps, Holmes said, a shadow of a smile crossing his lips. But not all things are meant to be remembered. Some truths, Watson, are better left forgotten. It is the struggle to uncover them that matters, not the knowledge itself. I stood there for a long time, the weight of his words settling over me. The world might forget, the custodians and the truth we had uncovered might vanish into the void of time. But the struggle, our struggle, would remain. It would remain in the fabric of the world, in the people who would go on to live their lives unaware of the battles fought to protect the very truth they took for granted. Are you ready to go, Watson? Holmes asked, his voice breaking the silence once more. I looked at him, and despite the confusion and the uncertainty that still lingered, I nodded. Yes, Holmes, let's go. And as we turned toward the door, I realized that even though our memories would fade, the essence of what we had done, the fight for truth and the defiance of a power that sought to erase it, would never truly vanish. It was the one thing that could never be erased from the world. We stepped out of the vault and into the foggy night, leaving the past and the custodians behind us. The world would continue, and perhaps, just perhaps, the truth would find its way back to the light one day.